Hi everyone, welcome back to Poetology. Happy New Year! I hope you had a great holiday. I'm glad to be back in 2024 with my favorite books of 2023. I read quite a bit last year, I think overall 57 books. I'm not so precious about reaching a certain number every year because I don't think that's what reading is about. But I'm still happy that I got to read a bit more than the previous year. And this year I'm already off to a good start as well. I love reading, always have. So it's always a pleasure to be able to have time to do this. Today I'm going to present 9 books. I have selected 3 for poetry, 3 for fiction, and 3 for non-fiction. And for poetry, the first one is this anthology, 100 Queer Poems, that I read early last year, and I loved the poems that were selected. I thought it was both very high quality and also pretty accessible for people, to pick up whether or not they are already deep into the poetry scene. And I would recommend it to just about anyone, really. It's edited by Mary Jean Chan and Andrew Macmillan, and you will find a lot of different poets in there. Some are very well known, some are classics as well. They've included Elizabeth Bishop, Langston Hughes, Wilfred Owen, for example. But there's also a lot of contemporary poets such as Kay Tempest and Natalie Diaz and Ocean Vuong, Richard Scott, etc. So you'll really find a really good mix of poets talking about topics that are close to their heart, and it will give you a glimpse into what queer poetry is like right now, and it's a thriving scene, so I would recommend it to anyone, but especially LGBTQ people who will find it particularly relevant. Second is no surprise at all, it is Mary Jean Chan's latest poetry collection, Bright Fear. I loved their first collection, Flesh, and I also have an interview with Mary Jean that you can watch. What I love about their writing is that it's both very personal and also extremely well crafted. The poems are varied in form. Some of the themes there are migration, language, and queerness, and family life, especially relationship to one's parents. I wasn't disappointed by this second collection, and so I would urge you to pick it up. This last one might be a surprise because I shocked myself by not selecting Eileen Myles' A Working Life, but instead The Swollening by Jason Purcell. And this is a gift from my partner, so I wasn't aware of Jason Purcell. So they are Canadian and they talk about the intersection of chronic illness and queerness. A queer body that is also an ill body. I've seen a lot of writing doing that recently, both academic books and also in more popular culture. Looking at illness and at the queer body as, both being marginalized bodies that have features in common in the way that they are perceived by society at large. And Swollening, first of all, is a really good title, a made-up word that works so well. And then I really needed this book, I think, myself. As you will see, chronic illness is a big theme of my reading this year. The non-fiction books that I've selected are about that. And so, this was great. And I would really like to read more by Jason Purcell, if I can find that, and by, other similar poets. I'm planning to read more about chronic illness in poetry this year as well. I'll just read a few lines from Cavity. The tooth runs so deep into the skull like a story. The strongest thing can endure such grinding pressure until tiny holes form, narrative inconsistencies betray the structure of what you tell yourself, and the veneer collapses. So in that short excerpt from the poem, you can see already that it starts with a physical issue and then moves on to the fragmentation of the experience of illness and reflects that in a very imaginative way. So there we go, Swollening. number 3 this year. Now, novels. I selected 3 novels, but sometimes I have so many books. I act as a library for my friends, and just 2 days ago I forgot about this video and lended some of the books I'm talking about to a friend. So I only have this one to hold. That's the first one for me in the novel category, which is no surprise again, Louise Erdrich being one of my favorite novelists. I really loved The Sentence. It actually came out in 2021, but I didn't read it then. I read it last year, and I knew it would be good to start it around Halloween, so that's what I did. I read it over Halloween. I would also recommend reading it around the Christmas season. It's like the perfect time for it. I think all book lovers will like a novel that is centered around a bookshop. What is unusual about this book perhaps is that the author is a character in the novel. Not a major character, but she's quite important in the background because she's the owner of the bookshop where this novel takes place. So I enjoyed this merging of fact and fiction, and how this novel chronicles the early stages of the pandemic and also the Black Lives Matter movement. And it also talks about prisons, but it's mostly about the importance of books. And in case you don't know, Louise Erdrich is a Native American writer, an Ojibwe writer, and so that also is an underlying theme in her writing. I wouldn't say this was quite as good as The Night Watchman, which won the Pulitzer Prize, but it was really good, and I would recommend it. The next novel that I cannot hold up is Young Mungo. I didn't read Douglas Stewart's first novel, so I started with this one, and I thought it was really good, really heartbreaking, but in a good way. Like, it breaks your heart, but it does give you a little bit of hope that in the midst of so much violence, love can still exist and endure. Young Mungo is a teenager from working class Glasgow who goes through a lot. He's gay, he is failing to be a proper man the way his older brother is, meaning someone who is quite violent and exerts that violence a lot in gang rifts in the streets of Glasgow. And because of that, he's quite a vulnerable boy, and that vulnerability gets preyed on, so content warning for sexual assault and violence in general. But then there is so much tenderness in the midst of that it really holds you through the whole narrative. Yeah, for me it was a very intense read that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I'm in awe of what Douglas Stewart has done with this novel. I will definitely also grab the first novel, Shuggy Bane, as soon as I find it. The last one that I want to talk about is the Gormenghast Trilogy. I had been meaning to read it for 13 years or more. I bought the novel ages ago. Here's a clip of the edition I have. It's quite a simple edition, although it has a few sketches by the author. And I hadn't read it. And finally I did. And I think the characters and the atmosphere of that huge castle will stay with me for a long time. I would say as a novel, it's not the best I've ever read, but once I was in it, once I was invested in these quirky, weird, difficult to like set of characters, I went through it. There are 3 novels in this trilogy, well duh. The first 2 are great. The third one is a bit odd. It's very different from the others. I'm not sure I would recommend reading it, but reading the first 2 would be great. And because I wanted to be immersed in that atmosphere, I also listened to the audio play. I might put it on the screen. So I listened to the audio play, which was really excellent. It's a very short summary of the entire thing, but it's worth it as an alternative maybe to reading the book, although the details are part of what drew me to the narrative. I would say that Mervyn Peake has a very characteristic way of writing that you might lose on by reading only a condensed version. And then I also checked out the BBC series, which was okay. There are many great actors, but the production as a whole is maybe not as good as it could have been. I've heard rumors that Neil Gaiman was picking it up. That would be very exciting. So I think it's great to read now. It's very masculine-centered, like a lot of male characters, although there are strong female characters. I would flag it up for ableism because, like, the evil character gets disfigured, and also there's a character who walks with a cane, and the way he's described is pretty horrible, using all the worst words that we hear to describe, disabled people in ways that are just not okay. And it's supposed to be funny when you read it, but yeah, if you're sensitive to that, it's not so funny. So I would definitely say be careful if you want to read it, be ready for that. It does use all of these stereotypical ways of describing disability as negative character traits. I mean, that's a mild way of putting it, really. Part of it is just how all these characters are a little awkward and strange and not so well adapted to life in various ways. The main character really is the place. It's that castle. It's the weight of tradition that is inescapable. It's having to take on that history at the expense of who you are or who you want to be or any desire, and just take it to the next generation. So it is a commentary on tradition, a commentary on monarchy, and on, the power of the individual spirit to break free, which is what the main character does eventually. For nonfiction, my favorite nonfiction book was Some of Us Just Fall by Polly Atkin. This is a memoir written by Polly Atkin, who's also a poet, and so her way of writing is very poetic and very creative. So it's definitely a creative nonfiction as well as a memoir. And she talks about nature and nature writing and her relationship to living in the Lake District and the idea of the nature cure as someone who is chronically ill and who has thoughts about ways in which these ideas around nature as a cure are problematic. And so she questions that. She outlines her relationship to nature without conforming to these preconceived notions of nature as healing, nature as, having curative properties. It's also an amazing introduction to disability studies if you want to do that without reading more academic books and you want to be introduced to some of the ideas without it being too dense. And because I was really coming to terms, with my own chronic illness, even though I've been ill now for 3 years already, it's quite a journey to be able to accept it and to integrate it. And so I've read more on the subject, including Year of the Tiger by Alice Wong. Alice Wong is a force of nature. She is a Chinese-American disability activist. And what I liked the most about this book is, her voice, for example, is like no nonsense, direct, to the point, a very fun voice, actually. And I enjoyed how she put different things in the book. We see conversations, for example, in one chapter, and then you see some artwork, sort of comic style artwork inserted into the work. There are short essays, there are mottos like respect my time with illustrations around them. There are Twitter threads, medical, or maybe Medicaid application papers, is that what it was? Yeah, something like that. Oh, and also pictures, that's her meeting President Obama through a screen on this robot. So she's assembled all of the things that she's been writing over the years into a book, and that makes it quite an original format for a book, for a memoir/essay book that discusses disability. And so I think it is worth it, definitely. The third book about chronic illness that I would recommend, that I read last year, is The Invisible Kingdom, Reimagining Chronic Illness by Megan O'Rourke. For me, it was valuable, but perhaps not as on point as the others, partly because she's American, so that's a different. She seems to be able to afford a lot of medical treatment. She has Lyme disease, but again, she's able to talk about medical gaslighting, present her own story of coming to diagnosis and how difficult it is to get to that point. And she has ideas about how the situation could be different. It's also well written. So if you have an invisible chronic illness, that book could also bring you quite a lot, especially if you're early in your journey. But also if you don't have a chronic illness, but you want to get an understanding of what it's like for people to go through this. And especially now with long COVID, so many people are ill and getting various conditions. I think it's very important to have an idea of what that does to someone's life and how they can move on from there, because life doesn't end with a diagnosis. And so it's, really a question of redefining who you are, what your values are, and how to move forward from that point. So that was a more themed take on nonfiction. I hope you like some of these books. Let me know if you've read one or more of these, or if they are on your to-read list and you'd like to grab a copy as soon as you can. Let me know also what your favorites were in 2023 and if you are looking forward to new books in 2024. I think I will do another video about reading soon, just to talk about how I read and my views on, all these trends about setting reading goals and how to read more, etc., etc. So I think I'll do a separate video about that. Something to look forward to if you enjoyed this one, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next video very soon. Bye!